Did you get a chance to see diversity dance during the recent semi-final of Britain's Got Talent? Well, it's amazing really. I've missed the entire series and this is actually the only clip that I've watched. But it really captured my attention, not just because diversity are phenomenal and creative dancers, but because the music and their actions really captured the journey that this world has been on, even just through these past 8 months. If you haven't seen it, I encourage you to find it maybe on YouTube or have a look back through Catch-Up TV to see if you can see it. Do you remember those days when people went to work and trains were packed and holidays were the only chance of a rest and time with family? It feels almost backwards now, considering the amount of time that we spend at home, avoiding public transport as much as possible, and spending time with our families. Maybe too much time if you're trying your best to work from home. Anyway, the whole diversity clip takes us through this journey, and whilst predominantly making a statement with regards to Black Lives Matter, they too remind us of the busyness of life and the hate and neglect of people and creation, contrasted with the love shown to one another, the appreciation of life that we have, and the realisation that the world before COVID was actually a fairly broken one. As they perform, they quote the line, "We discover that we prefer the world we found than the one we left behind." And whilst it may seem hard in these days, especially with the introduction of local lockdown restrictions and perhaps the second wave on the horizon, I wonder, can we begin to see the light and perhaps begin to see the benefits of being forced to stop and then restart? This then correlates with the message this week from Haggai. You may not know much about Haggai, but he's one of the 12 minor prophets in the Bible, pretty difficult to spell and even harder to find. And actually, we know very little about him, other than the fact he was a prophet, a teacher, a messenger who brings a message during the post-exilic era. And in contrast to many other minor prophets, he brings a message of hope rather than one of destruction. I think that's the reason why I like him. I'm a fan of hope. So as we pick up the message from today, Haggai is speaking with encouragement, for the former glory of the temple has been forgotten. 70 years have passed since its destruction, and therefore not many can remember what the old temple used to look like. And perhaps those that do are looking back and reflecting back on the temple with rose-tinted spectacles. People are looking at the ruins and are very reluctant to consider the better things that may be on the horizon. And they certainly are very reluctant to think that better things may take the place of that which was before. I'm sure it's not too hard to put yourself in their shoes, perhaps thinking back to the diversity dance and then to our current situation. Though the possibilities of life in the future are apparent, they perhaps feel difficult to imagine, and I'm sure at times we do find ourselves a little deflated or fed up even of life as it is just now. However, when we look back, and when they look back too, we can ask the question, does that which we left behind just seem like nothing now? And that is a paraphrase of Haggai 2 verse 4. And so it is in looking back that the people are then encouraged to be strong. This is said 3 times within Scripture. First to Zerubbabel, who would have been the king in the land had the exile not taken place, removing his position of power. Second, this is said to Joshua, who is the high priest. And thirdly, it is said to all the people in the land. And I think this repetition is said for good reason. God is saying to everyone, governor, priest, and people, I am with you. I covenanted to be so. My spirit is among you. Do not fear. We find that in verses 4 and 5. This is a message of unity across the whole community, a redemption almost. Just in the same way that coronavirus has brought people out of a self-focus into a spirit of community and care for one another, The return from exile has brought home a unified people who simply need to remain together with one accord in order to see the greater things that are to come. And so that challenge is for us too. As we continue in these days, we of course look ahead to what could be in the future. But I really feel what God is saying to us in these days is to look to now. To see the potential we have as the people we are, with the church leadership we have, under the government and even under current restrictions. What can we do as a people now to see greater things? To be involved now with greater things? To pray now into greater things? And so, following on from God's promised presence is God's empowering. He is going to come once again and fill his house with glory, as we read in verse 7. And in doing so, God is going to come and shake things up a bit. Similar to how he did during the Exodus as the Israelites were led into the promised land. And it also speaks prophetically into the establishment of Christ's kingdom and reign. This shaking not only speaks literally of shaking land and sea, but in upsetting the established rule. People have become accustomed to a royal monarchy. They have thus forgotten what it means to be God's people. They have forgotten the value of giving first to God, for they've begun to put up their own houses and make their own house in order before they re-establish the temple. And that is a summary of chapter 1. They think that resources belong to them and are not necessarily something to thank God for, to give back to him in an act of thanksgiving and worship. However, God reminds the people in verse 8 that the silver and gold belong to him, and therefore things are about to change into the way they were intended. The unity of priest and governor implies a new rule that is to come, where all will once again come under God's reign. So with all this in mind, my thoughts again go back to the diversity dance and that challenge within the lyrics. Why did it take a virus to make people better? As I mentioned earlier, there is a sense that the way things were before COVID and lockdown are perhaps reflected back on now as a system and a world that was broken, with an acknowledgement that there is room for improvement, even though it wasn't necessarily acknowledged at the time. We have been blessed by people coming together and supporting one another, and the generosity shown by so many helping people experiencing poverty and difficulty in these times. We've become so much more aware of our own mortality and the value of life, sometimes even a painful reminder. We now know for sure that not every day is promised, and therefore each and every day should evoke thanksgiving to God. And for many, lockdown has brought that back into a reality and people into a focus on God, which is just amazing. And yet there is so much more that can be done to demonstrate God's love and to allow God to fully reign in this land. And who are we to be the ones to stand against God? And if God is with us, then who can stand against us? God promises something far greater to come. God has promised that whatever went before is nothing compared to that which God has planned to come. That promise was fulfilled in Jesus coming to earth and the redemption for humanity that has occurred and is occurring every day and will come to fruition. And so, today, I encourage you to look back on the way things have been and to consider those things which you thought were good, but now perhaps think there might be room for improvement. What do you need to do today to make that change moving forward? Is there anything in your life that you are looking back on, perhaps holding on to, that you're seeing actually through rose-tinted spectacles? Is there something perhaps that you need to leave behind to allow room for that new glory? For the new will be greater than that which was before. Can you look forward? Are you prepared to look forward with optimism for what could be. Or maybe today you are already seeing what God is doing, where God is at work now. And therefore, is God asking you to be strong and brave today to do that which He's placed on your heart? If that's the case, remember God's Spirit remains among you. Do not fear.